Here we are. Okay, so good morning, everyone, properly. This morning, we're going to look at two more Plantagenet kings from the House Plantagenet. There it is. We're going to look at Henry III, he with the beard, right here. And we're also going to look at Edward I. Now, both of these kings are particularly interesting individuals. Maybe not the nicest of guys, as we will see, but who has been nice so far? Sadly, I think we're going to have to wait quite a while before we find kings or queens who are nice and huggy and lovely. Doesn't really happen in medieval times, I'm afraid. But they do both have interesting quirks to them, and they have interesting stories to go along with them as well. So let's jump in with Henry III. Now, Henry, he's king for a fairly long time by medieval standards. He becomes king in 1216 and dies in 1272. The thing that really stands out about Henry is that he's an incredibly religious man. All of our kings, or most of our kings, are fairly religious. Oh, Alea, what does Plantagenet mean? Plantagenet, as far as I know, doesn't mean anything in itself. It's their surname. So the Plantagenet kings were the king. The first one was Henry II, and so all the kings, his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they are all Plantagenet kings. It's their second name. And their symbol is the 3 lions, or at least 1 lion, yeah. Richard III was a Plantagenet, sort of. He was related to the Plantagenets, but he was of the House of York, so we would have called him Richard of York rather than Plantagenet. Technically, I think the last Plantagenet is Richard II, possibly Henry IV. I'll get back to you on that. It's either Richard II or Henry IV is the final Plantagenet, and then it goes into the House of Lancaster. No, goes into the House of Lancaster, then York, then Tudors, then Stuarts. There you go. That's the order. If my brain is working. Now that's a good question. Does this guy speak French? Yep. We still haven't got to kings who speak English yet. Oh no, it's going to take us a while before we get there. Yes, Henry III, like his parents and grandparents, they're all speaking French. Nobody yet, none of these kings of England want to speak English because it's a yucky language. Sacre bleu, non speak anglais. That wasn't real French, I just had a go. All right. And there is an elephant, yes. The first thing we're going to say about Henry this morning is that he is a super Christian. He is someone who goes down in the list of kings as being particularly religious. He gave a lot of money and a lot of guidance to the church. Now, some kings were like this. Henry VI, later in history, to mention him again, he was very, very religious as well. But then you've got kings like William II, who actively, fell out with the church and the Pope. So it's not always the case. But generally speaking, when you have a king who is aligned well with the Pope, so the church and the state, the king, are aligned together, generally speaking, the country works better that way because you've got the two great big blocks of power, the religious side and the royal power side, working together. And that usually makes things better. Unfortunately for Henry, this doesn't last for the entirety of his reign. As we'll see down there, there's a Baron's War Part 2 to come to. But generally speaking, his reign starts fairly peacefully, and he spends a lot of his time doing things that are religious. Now, he also, if his religion is one of his great big passions and loves, the other is animals. He absolutely loves animals, and he fills his place in London, including the Tower of London, with loads of exotic creatures. There are lions there, which would be fitting because he's a Plantagenet and that's his symbol. I believe he had a leopard as well, some monkeys, some foreign birds and things like that. But I think the main thing, the most important thing, or most impressive thing he has, was this elephant. Now, this picture was drawn by an artist called Matthew Paris at the time. So this is the literal elephant, or at least a picture of his actual elephant that King Henry III had. I'm being asked here, dead or alive? The animals are alive. Yes, this is a zoo, yeah? Um, so yeah, some of you are saying you've been to the Tower of London. Now, if you go to the Tower of London today, there are no animals there. I suppose there's lots of ravens, but it's certainly not a zoo. We've got to imagine the same building, or a very similar building, back in the time of Henry III, but he filled it with animals. So this is the elephant that was a gift from the King of France, King Louis the some number. There were lots of Louis. I'm not big on my French kings. But King Louis, he was good friends with Henry III. They got on pretty well for most of his reign, not all. And so King Louis, as a present to England, sent over this wonderful elephant, which would have blown the minds of many English people because they've never seen an elephant before. Some people would have heard tale. I have heard rumor of this strange animal with a uh, big, long, trunky nose and great big grey skin. Ooh, I think it is kind of like a rabbit, but bigger, they would have said to each other. Until, of course, they got to see the actual thing, and this is what Matthew Paris drew, this beautiful heffalump. So he loves his animals, does Henry, and he loves his church and Jesus and all that. So that gives us this idea of quite a peaceful guy. Unfortunately, not so much the animal loving, but the being an incredibly strict Christian did lead to problems for Jewish people, because Jewish people hadn't been particularly welcome in England for a while, to be fair. A lot of people in England were anti-Semitic, which means they did not like Jewish people, and often they treated them badly. Now, having said that, Jewish people had been coming to Britain for quite some time. There'd always been Jewish people in Britain, not many, small communities, but they really started to come in during the reign of William I, William the Conqueror. Now, we said that William the Conqueror was quite an angry, violent man, but he did see the value in bringing in people from other countries and different religions and faiths. And now, William had invited plenty of Jewish people to England, especially to come and work in the towns and cities, because Jewish people were the only people who could lend money. It was forbidden for Christians to do this, and in the Islamic world at the same time, it's forbidden for Muslims too. So the only people in Europe and North Africa who could run banks, or at least the kind of proto-banks, lending money to people at interest, the only people that could do that were the Jewish people. And William encouraged Jewish people to come to England to be able to do that so that England became a richer country. By the time of Henry III, though, Henry III is not impressed. He is so super Christian that he believes that no other religion should be around. He's not a very welcoming kind of guy. William was very Christian, but he also understood that other people had different faiths. Didn't really bother him so much. Henry, he takes it that step further, and he started making rules to make it really difficult to be Jewish and to live in England. He would make it so that Jewish people had to pay loads more taxes than non-Jewish people. The vast majority of this time are Christian. So they had to pay more money than other people did. They also had to follow strict laws. There was even this idea that Jewish people would have to wear a badge to show that they were Jewish in public, which is, well, incredibly similar to what Adolf Hitler did, of course. So Adolf Hitler, evil monster, he didn't do much new. He read his history and did things that people had already done, as terrible as that is. So we got to imagine that Henry III, sorry, there he is with his animals, and there he is with his Christianity, and most people are benefiting from this in the country, but not that small group of Jewish people. They are being bullied and being made to wear badges and having their money taken off them, and sometimes even their homes and their businesses would be stolen from them by the king if they annoyed him. Yeah, Rowan, I agree with you. Yes. Now, good question here from Lucas and Joshua. What if you did not go to church? It kind of wasn't a thing. In medieval England, you were expected to go to church, and church would have been a big part of your life. Um, it would also have been quite a mysterious part of your life, to be honest. We're talking Roman Catholic Church at this time. The only religion, the only language that is allowed for the Bible to be written in is Latin. The priests will read their sermons, which is their speeches to you, in Latin. But nobody knows Latin unless you're actually a priest or a monk. No one knows how to speak Latin or read Latin. So it's a strange world where everyone goes to church every week. In a traditional Roman Catholic medieval church anyway, you would go in and the priest would stand at the front, but he would stand away from the people. So he wouldn't look at the people because that was seen as silly. So you as a peasant would go into the church, you'd sit down, you'd look at the back of a priest who would then read from a book in a language that you don't understand. If you were lucky, the priest might explain to you what that means in English afterwards, or if you're unlucky, he might just explain it in French, which is no good either for most people in England. So it would have been a bit of a mysterious kind of thing. Now, holidays, that word holiday, comes from the special days of the year like Easter and Christmas, when you would be expected to pay extra money to the church. Yeah, that was what a holiday was. Not quite the same as our holidays today, where you go and relax and stuff. Back then, you do some work for the church, or you pay money to the church, or often both. Harry's asking, were there temples for Jews? There would have been small temples for Jews. We call those synagogues. And there would have been a few synagogues, but they wouldn't have been very impressive buildings. They would have been quite hidden, secret, out-of-the-way affairs. They existed, but not in the way they do in Britain today. Some synagogues in Britain are absolutely gorgeous. I don't know about the realism of the crown there, sorry. Now, good question here. What would happen if the Jews didn't pay the extra money? Well, to be honest, they could be beaten, put in prison, or sent out of the country. We can see an impression here. Now, I couldn't quite find whether this is Henry III or our next king that we're going to look at, but you can see these are the Jewish people, and this is the king, and he's basically saying, go away, out with you, go away. And the Jews, they don't look very happy here. They're off wandering around. Now, at certain times during history, it gets even worse for the Jewish people. Generally, when bad things happen, let's say a plague or an illness spreads, or maybe a child goes missing, the first people to be blamed were often Jewish people, and they would be attacked, and their homes and businesses would be burnt or destroyed. So it really was tricky to be Jewish at this time. Good question there. What was his first animal? I don't know what the first animal Henry had. It certainly wasn't the elephant. No, it certainly wasn't the elephant. Sorry. A synagogue, sorry, is the building for Jewish people. A synagogue. There you go. But I don't think there were any big official synagogues back in the medieval times, as we'll see. So Henry isn't being particularly nice to Jewish people. In fact, it's pretty rotten to be Jewish. And a lot of Jewish people do start to leave and head back to the continent, places like they're going to be a bit more friendly to them. To be honest, most of Europe at this time was not friendly to Jewish people. It wasn't much nicer in France or Germany or Italy or down into Spain. Jewish people were not welcome in medieval Europe at all. Really, the only place that Jewish people could get on quite nicely was down in Muslim-controlled countries, so North Africa, down into the Middle East. There, Jewish people were given far more respect and far more freedom. At times, their taxes would be raised, so it would be more expensive to be non-Muslim than Muslim, but that same tax would have applied to Christians too, so it wasn't specifically that the Muslims were against Judaism necessarily. It was more that Muslims decided that if you wanted to be a different religion, you should pay more money, so it was a bit more balanced. There certainly wasn't the violence and the persecution in the Muslim world against Jewish people that we saw in medieval Europe. So there you go. What was his favourite animal? That's a good question. I don't know. I've often seen him pictured with a leopard, so maybe that one. But I honestly don't know. I don't know if that's been recorded. I like to imagine it's the elephant because it's the biggest. But yeah, I don't know. So he's got his menagerie. He's got his church. He's not very kind to the Jewish people. He's also decides to pick a fight with poor old Prince Llewellyn. Now, Llewellyn, he's the Prince of Wales, see? And Wales at this time is its own country. Okay, it has been from the start of time. In fact, Wales has been a strongly, fiercely independent country. For those of you who don't know, I should probably put up a map of Britain, shouldn't I, so you know where Wales is. But Wales, here we go. Let's see if I can find one. Here we go. Wales has been a country which has basically avoided being invaded for a very long time. Here's Wales today, and it was pretty much the same border back then, a little bit different, but essentially the same. Wales had not been taken over by the Romans when the Romans invaded. They definitely had their tussles with Rome, but it was never fully taken over by the Romans. Wales was never really taken over by the Anglo-Saxons either, the people that at this time would have called themselves English. It had been its own thing. Oh, somebody's saying that my sound is bad. Let me see if I can reset the sound. There we go. Hopefully that helps. Some people have been to Wales. This is good. Now, yes, so it had never been taken by the Anglo-Saxons. When the Normans invaded, William I, he didn't capture it either. So Wales has got its own very distinct culture and language. It's its own place. And a lot of people, even today, would say that the real British people are the people of Wales, because they are the people that weren't, taken over by Romans or Anglo-Saxons or Normans. They kept pure British, if you like. I'm not sure how true that is, but yeah, it's a fair idea. Now, at the time of Henry III, the leader of Wales is Prince Llewellyn, or also known as Llewellyn the Great. And he is a bit of a legend in Wales, because it's during his reign that Henry starts to invade the country. And he starts to nibble away at it bit by bit. He sends his armies in. He starts to get rid of the rulers of Wales. Now, Wales at this time isn't just one country led by one king. Prince Llewellyn will be their leader at this time. But there are lots of different kings of Wales. And Henry starts to nibble away, and take those pieces. Ahmed here is saying that Eleanor was Henry's wife. This is true. Yes, not the Eleanor that we saw back in history, of course. She's long dead. But yes, his wife is a woman called Eleanor. That's true. Lots of people been to Wales. This is good. Someone's dad grew up near Wales. There you go. Hello, Noah. Let's see. Oh, he doesn't literally nibble it. He starts to take away. He basically takes over the south piece by piece during his reign. The southern kings and kingdoms start to fall and get eaten up by England. So our map starts to look, let's see, starts to little bite by bite. He takes bits away until poor old Llewellyn, he's really just left with the north. Over time, he's just got the north of Wales, every little bite making a difference. Now, he tries to fight back, and he does fight back. He keeps his northern lands, places like Anglesey up here. But the march of the English is pretty much incessant. Little piece by little piece, Wales is being eaten up. Will it survive? I don't know. Some people lived in Wales. Excellent. Yes, I like that. Yeah. I've got family that live in Wales too. Now then. So let's put our pictures on one side. There you are. You stay there. So maybe Henry would have gone on to eat up the whole of Wales. I don't know. Unfortunately for him, he had to put up with a civil war because the barons revolted. Now, this is called the Second Barons' War. The first one was during the reign of King John, bad King John, when the barons rose up and captured him and made him sign Magna Carta. A similar thing happens here. The barons get increasingly annoyed with him over issues of money. Some of them are genuinely angry about his treatment of the Jewish people. So that plays a part too. And I'm sure one or two of the lords, one of the barons, just wanted to have that elephant, Yeah. Cool. Okay, Grace. Yeah. So the barons are revolting. Henry has to go around and fight them, but after a few battles, disaster strikes. Oh dear. Henry and his oldest son, Edward, are both captured by the rebels. Dum dum dum. They are put into a prison, and the rebels take control of the country. Now I'm being asked here by Nadia and Kalin, sorry, if this is another Magna Carta deal. It's very similar to the Magna Carta deal. They're not going to get him to sign things. The idea is now that the barons will take over. Henry will get to still call himself king, but he will have no power. To be honest, Grace, I don't know what happened to the elephant here. I like to think the barons rode it around wearing big hats, but that's just my imagination. I don't know. That's what I would have done if I'd just captured a king and he had an elephant. I'd be putting a hat on and riding that thing around the place. That's what I like to imagine anyway. So, the barons, they take him. The plan is he gets to be the king, but he has no power. He just sort of waves and nods and things, and the barons make all the decisions. But one night, when everyone is sleeping, out from the prison escapes little Edward, the king's oldest son. He gets away. Now, he disappears into the night, leaving his dad, King Henry, behind, but he goes and he gathers up an army. And there are more battles and more fights until finally Edward, young Edward, I don't know how old Edward is at this point. We're talking a young man, but not a child, but yeah, a young man for sure. He would have been in his teenage years, maybe 20s. But Edward, he breaks in, he defeats this army, he rescues his dad, but there's a tricky moment because his dad has been dressed in not his own armor, he's been dressed in enemy armor. So the two armies are clashing and they're fighting, and Edward very nearly kills his own dad, thinking that he's an enemy soldier because of course he's wearing enemy armor. But at the very last minute, Henry holds up his hands and goes, wait, I am the king, I am the king. Thankfully, Edward recognizes his own dad at that point, and instead of killing his dad, he rescues him, and they go on to defeat the barons in a few more battles and to secure the throne of England once again. So really, Henry, he's a good king, not nice to Jewish people. He's got an elephant, but it's really his son, his son who's learning who's dealing with things here, yeah? The son is the one who's better with the army. His son, Edward, is the one who frees him from captivity and gives him the crown of England back. There you are. So, was Henry a big man? That's a good question, Harry. I'm not sure how big these kings were. I mean, generally speaking, in the past, people were a bit shorter. So I assume we're looking at around 5 foot tall for all of these kings. Now, his son, Edward, his nickname is Longshanks because he is particularly tall. How tall that means, I don't know. I mean, we're probably talking tall for the time. Shanks are just like a slang word for your legs, I guess, or an old English word for your legs. So Longshanks is long legs. Yeah, there you go. So he probably would have been, Henry probably would have been around 5 feet tall, I guess. But I can't be sure. We're talking smaller than modern people. Being 6 foot tall would have been quite rare back then. It would have happened that the Norwegians and the Danes, they tended to be taller, but not the English at this time. Yeah, people have got taller over the centuries. Sorry. That's a good question. So Rebecca's asked, how many years till democracy takes form in England? It's a tricky one to say. I mean, some people link back, the beginning of democracy to the Magna Carta, so to King John. But I probably wouldn't agree with that. I think that that's a bit too early. Parliament starts to be formed, I believe, under Henry IV, begins the proper Parliament, although I'm not sure. I have to check that as well. Richard II definitely makes steps towards democracy. So in this country, it wasn't like someone just flipped a switch and we got democracy. Democracy started to grow, and it took hundreds of years, getting gradually bigger and bigger and bigger until we end up with today. There wasn't like a day where democracy began. power shifted ever so gradually and ever so slowly from the kings and the church to the people. And there you go. Yeah. So we're getting some star ratings here. Some people saying 4 stars. That's cool. So they're quite liking him. 1.5 stars there, or 1/4 star. Ooh, okay, we're getting quite low here. Interesting. Let's see what your star rate is. Oh, 0, a 0 star there. But we've also got a 5 star. People are divided on how many stars he should get. Some people breaking the 5-star rating completely and going for 100 stars. So, I mean, if we're going to balance up his reign, he's a king who in himself is quite peaceful. He's not nice to Jewish people. He definitely harasses Wales a lot and starts taking their power away. But on a personal level, he is very pious and religious and tries to do the best thing, or at least what he thinks is the best thing. I'm sure that his hatred for Jewish people isn't just like his own idea. He's probably coming through his religion and trying to be a good Christian. And he does like animals, which, that's cool, I suppose. Yeah. So, 3 stars there in the middle from Grace. Okay. When did he start being king? 1216 he became king, and he stopped being king in 1272. Now, Edward then, he frees him. And Edward seems to have, he's been fighting in many, many battles now. It seems, though, that Edward is going to really get the taste for battling. Oh, yes. And Edward decides, because he's a good religious man too, dear religion back then, he decides to go and invade, join the 8th Crusade. So another crusade to the Holy Land to try and defeat the Muslims there and take over Jerusalem. So he leaves the scene for quite a while. Now, as Edward is away fighting, now that the Civil War has calmed down, the Barons' War is over, Henry sadly starts to get ill. It's believed he dies of old age, but it's unclear exactly on the cause of death. Some people speculate maybe a stroke killed him. Maybe that was the last thing that had to happen to him to finish him off, although we don't really have that data reliably. He didn't die in a particularly disgusting way anyway. He got old, he got ill, and he died quite rapidly. That's a good one. Possibly, Erica postulates, poisoned by the Jews. I suppose that would have been some kind of justice, but I guess not. I don't think they would have had the access to the king at this point. Now, let's take a look then. We've mentioned Edward already before. Edward is one of those extreme kings, let's say. You either love him or you hate him. I kind of respect Edward. I kind of like Edward, but we're talking an incredibly violent king here. Is the elephant still alive? No, the elephant is not still alive, I'm afraid. That would be an incredibly old elephant, wouldn't it? Yeah. I'm not sure that would, yes, that would work so well. Oh dear. I'm getting lots of people just saying my name, and I'm not quite sure why. I don't know. Have I missed something important? I'm not sure. We'll see. Lots of messages coming this morning. Yes, Amani, email me, please. And yeah, if anyone does have any work they'd like to show, please do email me, and I'll take a look. That'd be amazing. Yeah. Okay. Right. So Edward, then. I'm afraid we have no time to go back, but we will truck on. Hopefully, I'll help you understand what's going on next. Here we go. So Edward becomes king whilst he's away. Yeah, he's on crusade. He gets a message saying your dad is ill. His dad asks him to turn back, come back to England. But Richard decides that crusading is far more important. So he kind of ignores that first message. He's over there, he's fighting in the Holy Land. And to be honest, he's not doing great. He recaptures, I believe, with friends, the city of Acre. I'm not sure they take Jaffa, but they certainly don't take Jerusalem. And they end up having to come home. Now, on Edward's way home, he's, I believe, in Sicily, so southern Italy, that's where Jaffa cakes come from. That's right. Yes, that's where the oranges that make Jaffa cakes come from. Anyway, he's coming back home when he gets another letter saying, "Your dad is dead. You are now the king. Come home quickly." he doesn't come home quickly. He kind of takes a circuitous, slow route. He's not in any real rush to get back to England. He's another one of these kings who, yeah, take it or leave it. He's got things to do. He's busy. Um, but he does make it back to England, where he is crowned, and he becomes our next important king. So already we're seeing a king who, even before he becomes king, has been doing a lot of fighting. He's been fighting against the barons. He's been involved in these fights in Wales. He's now been on Crusade. He's ticking all the warlord boxes here. As I said, his nickname is Longshanks because he's quite tall. At least that's the idea. And the first thing that he becomes famous for is really bringing the hammer down on Wales. So whereas Henry III had started to eat and nibble away and take parts of Wales, Edward is without doubt the man to finish the job. He doesn't just take Wales, he conquers Wales, he stamps on top of Wales, and he makes sure that there will never, ever, ever, at least up to today, be an independent Welsh country. Now, Wales becomes part of England at this point. It's still got its own name, Wales, but in all intents and purposes, when it comes to the leadership, when it comes to the royalty, when it comes to the laws, it is the same as England. Poor Wales, because it was conquered so long ago, it doesn't even get a look in on our national flag today, the Union flag, which is made up of the flags of England, Scotland, with a little bit of Northern Ireland in there too. Wales doesn't even get a look in. There's no dragon on our flag, which there should be, because flags with dragons on are better than normal flags with just lines and stuff. But there you go. And he does a couple of things, does Edward, to make sure that Wales will never, ever be its own country again. Now, the first thing he does is quite practical. I've got this quite hazy looking diagram here now I look at it. But what he does is he builds what they call the Iron Circle, or the Iron Ring, around Wales, which is basically a huge ring, a circle, or at least a semicircle, I guess, of castles. He embarks on this huge castle building project. You can see it's kind of a circle going around like this. There already would have been English castles along here, so by the time you looked at it, you've got this iron ring. The Welsh people, even if they start to pick their noses without permission, Edward will know about it, and his soldiers will be there knocking on doors and bashing people on the head. So the Welsh people, they can't organise a resistance. Poor King Llewellyn. I believe he died before Edward fully took over, but his son Dafydd, I believe, gets killed by Edward, and so that's the last of the line of royalty in Wales. But the second thing that he does to really take that power away and to make Wales part of England is he calls his own son, who is also called Edward, he gives him the title Prince of Wales. So Edward II, as he will be in the future, becomes the Prince of Wales. Now, we still have a Prince of Wales today. It's still, and it always has been the tradition ever since this time, for the oldest child, or the oldest son usually, of the king or queen will be called the Prince of Wales. So at the moment, the current Prince of Wales is Prince Charles, because he's the oldest son of the Queen, and he will be the next king if it follows the proper line. Now, there you are. So some people have been to some of these castles in Wales. That's good. Yes, I've been to one or two. Yeah, excellent. Now, the reason he does this, he calls his son the Prince of Wales, is so that no Welsh people can ever call themselves the Prince of Wales again. Llewellyn was the Prince of Wales. His son Dafydd was the Prince of Wales. Now, the English guy, Edward's son, is the Prince of Wales. Therefore, because that title has been taken away, no real Welsh person can ever be Prince of Wales again, which is why the Prince of Wales is an Englishman today. Yeah. And this is something which seems to have worked. We haven't had, there was a couple of hundred years later, the Welsh did try a fight back, but they lost. And since that day, there have been no serious attempts for the Welsh to get independence from England. Having said that, I'm sure if you go into certain pubs in North Wales, you will find people planning that right now. There's always somebody grumbling. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. So he takes Wales. He does it quite brutally. He puts up his iron ring. He takes the name, the Prince of Wales, and he gives it to his own son, and he stops the Welsh from ever getting their lands back. They will never get their freedom again. Edward's nickname was Longshanks. I'll put that in. I'll write that up here. Here we go. It's spelled like this. Longshanks. There you go. Yeah. So already we're seeing that this guy is a bit of a warlord. It's about to get worse, though, in terms of being Jewish, because if you thought Henry III was bad, think again. Whereas Henry III made it hard to be Jewish in this country, and he made it, a not a good thing to do, or not a good thing to be. It was really difficult and expensive to be Jewish, which is weird. Edward just decided, nah, we're not having any Jews at all. They're banned. Go. And if you were Jewish, you were given a bit of time to leave the country, or you were killed. It was that simple. So 1290 is the final year that it was legal to be Jewish in this country. Every Jew had to leave, and they did. And for a few hundred years, well, quite a few hundred years, it was illegal to be Jewish. Good question there. Grace asks, so no banks. He got round this by Christians started to lend money, basically, was the idea. They found loopholes and different ways of interpreting biblical teachings to be able to lend their money themselves. But that's a good question, yeah. Where did the Jewish people go? Wherever they could, to be honest. Down to France, but they weren't particularly welcome there. A lot of them would have made their way to the Muslim world, where it would be more free, even if not perfect. But the story of the Jews for the last 2,000 years is a particularly dark one, or at least the last 1,000 years in Europe in particular. Jewish people, they tend to find nice places to live for a while, but it never stays perfect. Everyone always ends up, ganging up on them and pushing them out, as we've even seen in modern history. So it's it's a sad situation, of course. But there's Edward for you. He's not messing about. He's not making new laws. He's just saying it is illegal, go away. And that's the end of that, yeah? So the Jewish people have to leave. And for a long time, hundreds of years, there are no Jews in England, or at least not officially. I'm sure there are many Jews who do stay and pretend to be Christian instead, but officially there are no Jews left in England. Yes. Edward's rating is going down here by the look of it. The chat is not happy. Oh, no. Well, are there any Scottish people in the chat? Because it's about to get worse, I'm telling you. Because if you've already got Wales, and you've already got England, of course, and you've got parts of France, don't forget that at this time, Normandy and a lot of France is still part of England. Edward next turns his attention to Scotland. Okay, he's going to take it down. His nickname to go down in history, Longshanks was what he was called when he was alive, but on his tombstone, it doesn't say Longshanks. It says, here lies Edward I, King of England, Hammer of the Scots. That's what he wanted to be remembered as. The Hammer of Scotland. He is going to smash it. Oh yes, there are some people with Scottish blood in the chat. So there you go. Now, this starts with him against King Balliol. Now, King Balliol is the King of Scotland. Scotland has had its own very long line of kings, just like the kings of France, though. I can never remember the order of them. There's a lot of them called Malcolm. I know that. So do with that what you will. The king at this time is called Balliol. And at first, he and Edward get on all right. For most of medieval history, England and Scotland have an understanding, that they'll leave each other alone. There's a border which they both guard pretty securely, and there's sort of intermarriage between the two royal families, and nobles from both countries will mix and mingle. There's a lot of French blood running through Scotland as well, so it's not like Scotland is completely different from England in every way. They're very similar, at least their upper classes are, their ruling classes. But Balliol essentially. Edward comes to him with demanding more power, more money from Scotland to, keep him happy. He wants Balliol to kind of follow him along and do what Edward says, because England is bigger and stronger and, do what we say. Balliol isn't taking any of this. He says no. He says, I'm not going to do it. No, I'm not following you around, Edward. I got my own country. I love it. I do. And so there's a great big battle, yeah, and um, Balliol is killed, essentially. Yeah, Edward kills him, has him arrested, killed, um, and claims Scotland for his own. He says, Scotland is now mine. I'm the Hammer of the Scots. Well, hey, hey. But it doesn't all go his own way, because then Scotland strikes back, led by a man called William Wallace. Ooh, he with the blue face paint and the crazy hair. Now, William Wallace is, well, according to the myths at least, William Wallace is like a peasant who grows up hating the English because he sees that Edward has taken over his country. There's a film that was made all about him called Braveheart, in which his wife is killed by the evil English. How true all that is, it's a bit vague. I think William was actually a bit more of a nobleman, but still, it's a nice myth. Now, William, he leads the Scots in a fight back against the British, which is against the English, sorry, which is quite impressive, because he's not, his king is dead. Edward has taken over the country. So William, he raises this rebel army and attacks back. There's an incredible victory that the Scottish have at Stirling Bridge, where there's a battle between the English and the Scottish. The Scottish are greatly outnumbered, but through some sneaky tactics and some crazy shenanigans, they managed to defeat the English, and Edward's army is sent packing. Now, William will go on now for about 3 years after this battle. He will roam Scotland, finding any English people he can and killing them. And in fact, at one point, he will even invade down into England and attack the city of York. He does all this, does William, with help from some Irish rebels, so it's not just Scots, but mostly Scottish people. And his grisly way of showing his hatred for the English is that he has a sword belt made out of the skin of English soldiers. Ooh, disgusting. So he's got this human belt that he wears where he keeps his sword in it. Nasty indeed. So he's a bit wild, he's a bit scary, especially to Edward. And of course, Edward absolutely hates him. Now, Edward, so far we've had Edward take an army up and defeat King Balliol. Then William Wallace has sent an army and defeated England, and they've had to retreat. Next, it's going to swing back to the English, though. So, it sounds Viking. Balliol, I suppose, maybe. Is that what you mean? I don't know. Oh, Stirling Bridge. Yeah. No, I see. It's a bit like Stamford Bridge, isn't it? Yeah, I think that goes. Yeah. Yes, someone's saying here that his crown looks heavy. It is a heavy crown when you're spending all day hammering countries and killing people. Yes. I bet you can, Lucas and Joshua. So, it's now time for the English to strike back. Edward, he raises another massive army, and he marches up to Scotland, and he brings the Scottish to battle, and he defeats them at Falkirk. Now, the Battle of Falkirk is, a resounding English victory, and just after this, William Wallace is captured. He is dragged down to England in chains, and he suffers a terrible fate. He is hanged, drawn, and quartered. Which means they hang him until he's nearly dead. Then they cut him open and rip out his insides and show them to him. That's the drawn part. And then they chop him into bits. There you go. And they put his head on a pole and they marched it around England to show everyone exactly what happens if you mess with Edward. Don't mess with the Longshanks. It is gross. It is a gross way to die. It was the worst punishment in medieval England. The idea was to make people really understand exactly what happens if you annoy the king. It was only really used for traitors against the crown. And William Wallace was a very public traitor who had actually defeated English armies. So, yeah, it was never going to end well for him, I'm afraid. So, now the English have the upper hand. But it's at this point when the Scots, they decide, no, we're not having it anymore. And they push back again. And they kick the English out of Scotland, sorry. So, we've had The English invade Scotland, kill King Balliol. William Wallace pushes back at Stirling Bridge and defeats them. Then the English fight back and defeat them at Falkirk. And now the Scottish have come back and kicked them out again. It is. It's turn taking. This is right. It's a long and bloody war for sure. Now Edward, he's had enough by this point. He is not going to stand with any more Scottish naughtiness, as he would see it. Remember, he wants to be known as the Hammer of the Scots, not the gentle poker of the Scots. That's a rubbish epitaph to put on your tombstone. Here lies Edward I, he who poked the Scots a bit. No, he is the Hammer of the Scots. He's going to destroy them. So he gathers up a great big army and he marches it up the country, stomp, stomp, stomp. Now, as he's just going through Cumbria, which is northern England, near the border of Scotland, unfortunately, he dies. Edward will never fully get to hammer the Scots because, like so many before him, he's going to poo himself to death. Oh dear. On his way to Scotland, he gets dysentery, he starts to poo a lot, and he dies. So his revenge is lost on the toilet. He never quite gets to finish off Scotland the way he would. But not all is lost, because Edward has a son. His son is called Edward II. Ooh. Yes. And we will look at Edward II next time. But this is exactly what the Scottish people need. Yeah, it's what they've been hoping and praying for. What they want is an end to English aggression. Yeah, they've been poked and prodded and hammered a little bit, and they don't want to go the same way as Wales. Now, if William Wallace had been successful for a time, but not totally successful, one of the things that William Wallace did do was encourage a man called Robert the Bruce. Now, Robert the Bruce was a nobleman from Scotland who, at this point, decides that he will take up the fight of William Wallace, and he will strike back against any English. Bear with me, I seem to have gone frozen. Let me see if I can fix that. There we go. Hopefully that works. There we go. Hopefully. Well, we'll talk about Edward II next time. But yeah, so at this point, he's Robert the Bruce is gathering up an army of 7,000 men. And the army that is marching up the country that was led by Edward I, but is now not because Edward I is dead, is taken over by Edward II instead, his son, his young son, ready to prove himself true King of England and Hammer of the Scots himself. Mini Hammer, maybe. Little baby Hammer. But Robert the Bruce is waiting for them. And probably one of the most famous battles in Scottish history then occurs, the Battle of Bannockburn, where the forces of Robert the Bruce, 7,000 strong, ambush the English army of 25,000 soldiers, and in a kind of miracle, they defeat the English, who end up being either killed in those forests or running home back to England with their tails between their legs. Now, this starts the beginning of 300 years of freedom for Scotland. It will be at least 300 years before Scotland is finally taken over by England. And to be fair to the Scots, it will never be taken by violence. The reason that Scotland and England become connected is because the King of Scotland will someday become the King of England, King James I. So the start of the Stuart era will see the coming together of Scotland and England under peaceful terms, and then later under the reign of Queen Anne, it will officially become part of the United Kingdom. So there are a few hundred years to wait, but the fate of Wales is not to be shared by Scotland. Scotland keeps its independence and its fierce warrior spirit. Aye, freedom! Whereas Wales, unfortunately, has been stomped by the hammer that is Edward I. There you go. So give me a shout out before we wrap up today. I've already seen that some people are giving Edward 0 stars. Is anyone a fan of King Edward here? Edward I, Longshanks, Hammer of the Scots. -1 star. Ooh. 1 from Heidi, thank you. -5, 0 stars, 14 stars from someone, that's nice. 9 stars, 0.7 stars. Okay, we're getting fractional. Oh, he's not very popular, I must say. 2 stars there. Okay, I mean, in terms of being a warrior king, he's probably one of our most successful ones. Uh, Richard the Lionheart is the one who goes down in history as the warrior, but I honestly think Edward was a better general and fighter than Richard the Lionheart ever was. Unfortunately, he doesn't go down very favourably in either Welsh or Scottish history, that's for sure. If you ever do visit Scotland or Wales, I probably wouldn't mention your love for Edward I. You wouldn't be a very popular person, I'm afraid. So next week we will have a look at Edward II, who unfortunately, well, I'll let you decide. We'll see whether he gets more or less stars, I guess. And then we'll be looking at my favourite king of all time. Oh yes, my number one. We're going to be looking at Edward III as well. So something to look forward to next week. Tomorrow we're going to Ethiopia for geography, and on Wednesday off to ancient Persia. So hopefully I will see some of you then. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful week if I don't see you till next time. And yeah, if you do any cool work, let me see it. Send it to me via email. And yeah, I'd love to see it. Thank you very much. Goodbye.